Chichén Itzá. I mean, just the name itself, right? It brings up these incredible images of towering pyramids and long-lost secrets. For centuries, this amazing Maya city has just been a place of total wonder. But you know, some of its biggest mysteries, they're not carved in stone. They're buried deep beneath it, locked away for hundreds of years, just waiting for us to find the right key.
So, even with everything we've managed to learn, you gotta wonder, what was life and, well, death really like for the people here? What kind of rituals were actually happening in the shadows of these giant pyramids?
Well, in 1967, they got a pretty chilling answer. While building a new runway, workers stumbled onto something, a hidden underground chamber. And inside, the remains of more than 100 children. It was a discovery that kicked off a mystery that would go completely unsolved for over 50 years.
Okay, so this wasn't just some random grave. The children were found in what's called a chiltun. Now, usually that's just an underground cistern for storing water. But you have to understand, for the Maya, a chiltun was way more than that. It was sacred. They saw it as a direct portal to the underworld. So this was a ritual site.
So for decades, archaeologists were just left scratching their heads. They had so many questions. Who were these kids? Were they related to each other? Why were they all buried here together? And were they locals or were they brought in from far away for whatever happened here? The bones just weren't talking.
But fast forward half a century and suddenly we have the technology to give these remains a voice. Scientists used cutting-edge ancient DNA analysis on 64 of the skeletons, and it was like they were finally able to reopen this very, very cold case.
And believe me, the story their DNA tells, it's wilder than anyone ever expected. In fact, the very first result that came back from the lab immediately threw out some of the most popular ideas about Maya sacrifice.
100%. Let that sink in. Every single one of the 64 children they tested was a boy. This completely flips the script on those old, sensational stories about young women being sacrificed. Nope, this ritual was specifically and only for boys.
But that incredible fact, that was just the warm-up act. The DNA was holding on to an even bigger secret, something so statistically unlikely that it had to be on purpose. It points to a very, very specific selection process.
Get this, identical twins. And not just one set, two sets. To find two pairs of identical twins in a group this small from an ancient burial, I mean, the odds of that are just astronomical. It's almost impossible.
Let me put this in perspective for you. Identical twins naturally happen in only about 0.4% of the population. Here, in this burial, the rate was over 3%. There is no way that's a coincidence. This wasn't random at all. These twins were chosen for a reason. So, the big question is, why twins?
And to figure that out, we have to look beyond the lab. This is where science and ancient Maya beliefs come crashing together. To get this discovery, you have to dive into their sacred stories. You see, deep in Maya mythology, you have these central figures called the hero twins. They're these super important characters who stand for all the big dualities in life. Life and death, the sun and the moon, the sky and the earth. And in their most famous story, they actually travel into the underworld to battle the gods of death. So for the Maya, twins had this huge symbolic power.
So we've known about the hero twins for ages, from their art and their writing, but this is the first time we've ever found actual physical evidence of twins in a sacrificial burial. It's like a direct link from their mythology straight to the human remains. It's just incredible.
But the DNA wasn't done talking. The analysis also tackled another one of those original questions. Were these kids actually from around here? And the answer creates this amazing connection between an ancient event and people who are alive today.
So what the researchers did was actually team up with the modern Maya community of Tixcalco-Tuyub, which is just a short drive from the ancient city. They wanted to see if there was any kind of genetic link between the children who were sacrificed and the people who call that region home now. And when they compared the DNA from the ancient remains to the DNA of people living there today, bam, it was a perfect match. A direct, clear genetic line stretching across centuries. So these children weren't outsiders brought in from somewhere else. They came from the local Maya population. They were the ancestors of the very people living there right now. And this is where the story takes one last, absolutely mind-blowing turn. Because that genetic connection revealed a final secret. A story not about sacrifice, but about survival.
It's a story written in the differences between the ancient DNA and the modern DNA. A story about how the relatives of these children survived a continent-wide disaster.
Okay, so let's break down the timeline here. The sacrifices are happening around 900 AD. Then, 600 years later, Europeans arrive, and they bring diseases that the indigenous populations have zero immunity to. We're talking about apocalyptic epidemics like the Cockalizley pandemic in 1545, which killed up to 90% of the population. It's a staggering number. But some people survived, and the key to how they survived was hidden in their genes.
So when scientists put the ancient DNA side by side with the modern DNA, one thing really jumped out at them. There was a huge change in one specific part of the genome, the genes that control the immune system. Something really big had happened in those 600 years.
This, right here, is a perfect example of natural selection. Evolution happening right before our eyes. The DNA from the ancient children showed a really low number of a specific immune gene variant, something called HLA-DR4. But in the modern Maya population, its frequency is way, way higher. And why does that matter? Well, it turns out this gene variant gives you better protection against Salmonella enterica, the exact bacteria that caused that horrifying 1545 pandemic. Basically, people who had this genetic superpower were more likely to survive and have kids.
I mean, listen to what the researchers themselves said. This genetic shift isn't a fluke. It's a clear signature of an evolutionary adaptation, a direct response to the intense pressure of a deadly disease. In other words, this isn't a guess. It's a clear biological scar left by history.
So it's just incredible, right? The very same DNA that helped us understand this ancient tragedy also tells this powerful story of resilience. The blood of the survivors, running through the veins of people today, carries this 500-year-old story of surviving against one of the worst disasters in human history.
And it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? For centuries, we've looked at stone ruins and old pottery to piece together the past. But what this shows us is that some of the most profound stories of tragedy, of myth, of unbelievable survival, they're not written in what we built. They're written inside us, waiting to be read in our very own DNA.
Enjoyed this video? Please like, share it with a friend, and press the bell icon to never miss an update.